Warden. Warden, female equivalent being Wardeness, is a title bestowed upon the head of a great house by the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. The Wardens command the armies of one of the constituent regions of the Seven Kingdoms in the name of Iron Throne for the defense of the entire realm. The Warden of a constituency is expected to lawfully command a quarter of all armies in the realm during a time of crisis. By custom, the title is functionally hereditary. However, a warden does not necessarily have to also be one of the lords paramount rulers of the constituent regions of the realm, though this is almost always the case. For example, if an elderly or infirm ruler came to be the head of one of the great houses listed below, the office of warden might be delegated to another family member young and capable enough to lead armies in the field. Likewise, if the head of one of the great houses listed below was too young, the office of warden may be delegated to an older and more experienced individual. Warden appears to be a title holding higher rank than that of Lord Paramount. The lords of the Riverlands do not traditionally hold the title of warden and instead submit to the warden of their area. The situation was similar for the lords of the Stormlands prior to the extinction of House Tyrell. As of 305 AC, the ruler of the Stormlands is the Warden of the South instead of the ruler of the Reach. The Prince of Dorne is not a warden, but has full control over their armies, so it can be presumed that the prince has the same military authority of a warden in Dorne. Although there were traditionally 4 wardens in Westeros, the office of Warden of the North was abolished in 305 AC following the secession of the North. Warden is a title used in different regions of the known world, including Essos and especially Westeros. Warden of the East is the title given to the person responsible for the defense of the eastern coasts of the Seven Kingdoms. Traditionally, the title is conferred upon House Arryn, Lords of the Eyrie and Defenders of the Vale. Warden of the North is a title traditionally held by House Stark, the Lords of Winterfell and the North. Responsibilities. The initial appointment of a warden in northern Westeros was likely to help deal with the wildlings. The territory of the North also has shores on both the Shivering Sea and the Sunset Sea, making pirates and reavers a real threat. Warden of the South is a warden title bestowed on the most prominent house of the Reach by the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. All known wardens of the South thus far have been from House Tyrell, who became Lords of Highgarden after the extinction of House Gardner, the former kings of the Reach, during the War of Conquest. Responsibilities. The initial appointment of a warden in southern Westeros was likely to deal with Dorne, which had not been subdued during the Targaryen conquest and was still hostile to outsiders. When Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms during the reign of King Daeron II Targaryen, the title likely became more ceremonial. However, the warden titles were used during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Warden of the West is a title bestowed on the most prominent house of the Westerlands by the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms since the War of Conquest. All known wardens of the West have been from House Lannister. Traditionally, the title is held by the head of the house, the Lord of Casterly Rock. Responsibilities. The initial appointment of a warden in western Westeros was likely to deal with the Ironborn, who were prone to reaving and pirating along Sunset Sea and the western shores. Current wardens of the Six Kingdoms. Warden of the West, title traditionally held by the Lord of Casterly Rock, the head of House Lannister of Casterly Rock, since Larenai Lannister, the last king of the Rock, submitted to Aegon I Targaryen. Previously held by Lord Tywin Lannister and Queen Cersei I Lannister, the title is currently held by Lord Tyrion Lannister. Warden of the East, title traditionally held by the Defender of the Vale and Lord of the Eyrie, the head of House Arryn of the Eyrie, since Rhaenyra Arryn, the last king of Mountain and Vale, submitted to Aegon I Targaryen. Previously held by Lord Jon Arryn and then held by Robin Arryn until the Vale joined the reinstated Kingdom of the North. Robin Arryn, having come of age, can be legally considered the Warden of the East after choosing to elect Bran Stark as Lord of the Six Kingdoms. Warden of the South, title traditionally held by the Lord Paramount of the Reach and Lord of Highgarden, the head of House Tyrell of Highgarden, since Harlan Tyrell, steward to the last king of the Reach, Myrne Gardner, surrendered Highgarden and the Reach to Aegon I Targaryen. Randall Tarly, the head of House Tarly of Hornhill, was promised the title by Cersei Lannister but was executed by Daenerys Targaryen after the Battle of the Gold Road before it could be bestowed upon him. Although Bronn was named the Lord Paramount of the Reach and Lord of Highgarden following the extinction of House Tyrell, the title of Warden of the South was bestowed on Gendry Baratheon, the Lord Paramount of the Stormlands and Lord of Storm's End. Abolished warden titles. Warden of the North, title traditionally held by the Lord of Winterfell, the head of House Stark of Winterfell, since Torrhen Stark, the last king in the North, submitted to Aegon I Targaryen. Centuries later, Robb Stark was named the king in the North after Eddard Stark, the previous Warden of the North, was executed under false charges. After Robb's death, the title was held by the head of House Bolton of the Dreadfort after House Bolton usurped House Stark during the Red Wedding and returned the North under the authority of the Iron Throne. With the extinction of House Bolton in the Battle of the Bastards and the subsequent declaration of the North as an independent kingdom once more, Jon Snow, the alleged illegitimate son of Ned Stark, was named the King in the North, a position he held until pledging fealty to Daenerys Targaryen, after which he is appointed Warden of the North. This event marks yet another unprecedented split in the Northern governance system, as with his title of King, Jon's title as Warden of the North was for the first time not held jointly with that of Lord of Winterfell, which was held by his legal half-sister and biological cousin, Sansa Stark. During Jon's incarceration by the Unsullied for murdering Daenerys, Sansa briefly served as Wardeness of the North. However, with Bran's accession as King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, and Sansa's accession as Queen in the North, the position has been indefinitely abolished. History. Essos. The ancient title of Warden of the River is used by the Meereenese official in charge of ferries, dredges, and irrigation ditches along the Skahazaden. Westeros. Wardens have historically been used through Westeros south of the Wall, including by petty kings of Dorne prior to Nymeria's War. During Aegon's conquest and the unification of the Seven Kingdoms, Aegon the Conqueror granted new warden titles to monarchs who submitted to House Targaryen, including Loren Lannister, Rhaenyra Arryn, and Torrhen Stark. Aegon also named Harlan Tyrell, a former steward, as Warden. Wardens for the Iron Throne act as supreme military leaders responsible for the defense of their region in the event of foreign invasion. In times of peace, this prestigious title is purely honorary. Tradition holds that each title is hereditarily given to the lord of a certain family, but the king retains the right to award it to another of his choosing. This typically only happens if the traditional holder dies and his heir is not yet of age, although in times of turbulence the office may be offered to those holding a monarch's favor. The four major directional wardens, as per the start of the books. Warden of the East, held by Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie. House Arryn were once kings of Mountain and Vale. Warden of the North, held by Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell. House Stark were once kings in the North. Warden of the South, held by Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden. House Tyrell were once stewards to House Gardner, the kings of the Reach. Warden of the West, held by Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock. House Lannister were once the kings of the Rock. There are also smaller-scale wardens. Warden of the Prince's Pass, Guardian of the Prince's Pass in Dorne. Held by Lord Franklin Fowler as per the tradition of House Fowler. Warden of the Sands, Guardian of the Deserts of Dorne. Only granted to Lord John Rosby during the First Dornish War. Warden of Stone Way, Guardian of the Bone Way in Dorne. Held by Lord Anders Ironwood as per the tradition of House Ironwood. Warden of the White Knife, Guardian of the White Knife in the North. Held by Lord Wyman Manderley of White Harbour as per the tradition of House Manderley. After reaching majority and beginning to rule in his own right, King Jaehaerys I Targaryen replaced the Warden of the King's Mint, among other lesser offices. King Robert I Baratheon called upon Tywin, his Warden of the West, and Eddard, his Warden of the North, to help suppress Greyjoy's rebellion. In the books. Typically, the Warden of the North defends against wildling attacks that come south of the Wall. The Warden of the West, from House Lannister, defends against coastal raids from the Iron Islands. House Greyjoy were not chosen to be wardens, because more often than not, they are what the Warden of the West is defending against. Even though they submitted to the Iron Throne, illicit Ironborn raiding would occur from time to time and would have to be suppressed. The Warden of the South, from House Tyrell, would defend against border skirmishes with Dorne, as Dorne actually retained its independence for 2 centuries after the Targaryen conquest, and was only united to the realm by marriage alliance, a century before the War of the Five Kings. This is why House Martell of Dorne is not the Warden of the South. The Warden of the East, from House Arryn, seems to have defended against raids or invasion from the free cities across the Narrow Sea, such as the threat during the War of the Ninepenny Kings when an invasion was mounted from the Stepstones in the Narrow Sea. House Tully were not wardens, probably because the Riverlands are centrally located within the realm and far from external threats. It is not clear why House Baratheon were not named as wardens, as the Stormlands border Dorne to the south, and thus they could have been wardens of the south, and also border the Narrow Sea like the Vale, and thus could have been wardens of the east. The Tyrells may have been chosen as wardens of the south due to the larger army and population of the Reach, and because more Dornish attacks may have been targeted at the fertile lands of the Reach instead of the forests of the Stormlands. House Arryn may have been chosen ahead of the Baratheons as wardens of the east because they had to deal with contentious hill tribes in their mountains and thus needed the military assets at their disposal to deal with them. Also, the Undul invasion thousands of years ago began in the Vale of Arryn, so it has been used an invasion corridor across the Narrow Sea before. After Jon Arryn died, Queen Cersei managed to convince King Robert to name her brother Jaime Lannister as the Warden of the East, because Jon's only son and heir Robert Sweet Robin Arryn is just a child. This greatly angered many lords in the Vale because Jaime has no connection to House Arryn or the Vale, so they begin to defiantly refer to Sweet Robin as the true Warden of the East. Ned Stark is also opposed to Robert's decree because it puts the armies of 2 regions under command of a single house. Jaime, however, never actually travels to the Vale or makes any attempt to take command of the Vale's armies during these few months, and thus his hold on the title was nominal. Jaime continues to technically hold the position while he spent a full year as a prisoner of the Starks after the Battle of the Whispering Wood, although his imprisonment meant that the position was left officially vacant. The title of Warden of the East is restored to Sweet Robin by Tywin Lannister as one of the conditions of the marriage alliance between Lisa and Peter Baelish, which brings House Arryn back into the Lannister fold. The TV series omitted this entire subplot. Following Tywin's death, Cersei gives the title of Warden of the West to Davin Lannister, son of Ser Stafford Lannister, not because she trusts Davin, but due to an unpleasant exchange of words with Kevin, who rejects the post of Hand of the King after Cersei refuses to name him Lord Regent as well and relocate to Casterly Rock. Davin does not regard his appointment lightly, but he feels that his uncle Kevin should have been chosen for that office. By the point the books reached, the 4 major Wardens of Westeros are as followed. Warden of the North, Roose Bolton. Warden of the West, Davin Lannister. Warden of the East, Robert Arryn. Warden of the South, Mace Tyrell. In addition to the 4 major wardens, in the books there are other lesser wardens, which control certain areas. Warden of the Prince's Pass, traditionally held by House Fowler of Dorne as the Guardians of the Prince's Pass. Currently this title is held by Lord Franklin Fowler. Warden of the Stoneway, traditionally held by House Ironwood of Dorne as the Guardians of the Boneway. Currently this title is held by Lord Anders Ironwood. Warden of the White Knife, traditionally held by House Manderley of the North as the Guardians of the White Knife. Currently this title is held by Lord Wyman Manderley. Warden of the Southern Marches, created by Robb Stark for his uncle Brynden Tully, in recognition for his military prowess during the War of the Five Kings. Currently the title does not mean much, though, since the Starks and Tullis have been brought down, Riverrun has surrendered to the Lannisters, and Brynden is a fugitive. In the world of Ice and Fire and Blood, a 5th major warden title called Warden of the Sands was created by Aegon the Conqueror during the First Dornish War. Jon Rosby was appointed to this position to rule Dorne in the king's name. However, the Iron Throne was defeated by the Dornishmen, stopping Aegon's attempt to disestablish the princedom of House Martell. When Dorne entered the Seven Kingdoms over a century later, the position of Warden of the Sands wasn't renewed, the Martells continued styling themselves as Princes of Dorne.
If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.